WandaVision, a podcast about Marvel, the MCU, and right now, Captain America, the First Avenger. I'm Alex.
I'm Justin.
And we have a special guest today, Amelia Emberwing, editor for What to Watch. Amelia, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And hi, everybody.
Thanks so much for coming on, and apologies that our third Pete is not here today. He sent a note, and I'm just going to read it now. I hate America. It's very weird, but...
Yeah, that is a weird thing to say.
Yeah, very rude. But Amelia is here, so that's all good. Now, to give you guys the broad overview, you probably know this about the movie, but this is the last movie before Marvel's Avengers, the fifth movie in the MCU overall, and we've been doing a walk through phase one of the MCU between Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Loki, which is coming up very rapidly. But this movie came out July 22nd, 2011, directed by Joe Johnston, written by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. Now, I remember exactly where I was and how I saw this movie and my reaction to it first, but Amelia, I want to go to you first. What was it like when you first saw this movie? What was your initial reaction, and how has it grown or not over the intervening years?
I think it was, as enamored as a lot of people were, outside of, certain critics. But I think it was for a different reason. I obviously love Steve Rogers, but Peggy Carter is my favorite character in the MCU. So, obviously that means her. So yeah, it was highly positive. I think it's a great origin. It's definitely my favorite origin out of everything that we've seen in the MCU for sure.
Just what about you? What was it like when you first saw the movie, and what was it like revisiting it now?
Well, let me say, I have a confession. I never watched I never watched it the first time. This is my first time fully watching this movie.
Really?
Right. Yes. I feel like you guys used to make fun of me on the show, and then it's just been so long since we've talked about it. But I didn't even realize until I sat down to watch it this morning. I've seen it from like the middle on, but I've never seen like the first almost third to a half of this movie.
That's the best part. Honestly,
it's so good. I couldn't believe how good this movie is, and that's a huge confession to throw out there. But honestly, like it's definitely, I agree with you, Amelia, the best origin. This movie is so confident. We've said this about every movie that we've in the phase one, that this is the one where the Marvel style fully came together, but it's actually this one.
Yeah.
This is the one where it had the confidence to be like, we're going to tell some jokes. We're really setting up the Avengers. We're doing everything at once while also just having a great Indiana Jones-esque movie here. And maybe I'm being too effusive because I literally just watched it for the very first time, but this movie's fantastic.
Well, and a little bit of a note here before I tell my embarrassing story about the first time I saw Captain America. This is directed by Joe Johnston, who directed The Rocketeer, which you also love, right, Justin?
One of my favorite movies is The Rocketeer.
Yeah.
The only weird thing about The Rocketeer is that they somehow climb up from the bottom of the blimp through the hydrogen to the top of the blimp in the grand finale. Doesn't make sense, not explained. That's the only part that I have a criticism about. Otherwise, great movie.
Yeah. So my confession is I went to see this movie. This came out during Comic-Con in 2011, and I was down there in San Diego. I live on the East Coast, for anybody listening who doesn't know us at all. So I went to see it, I think, opening night at midnight. So it was 3 a.m., my body's time. I straight up fell asleep, like in the middle. I tried so hard.
You're worse than me. You're
terrible.
Worse than me.
Absolutely terrible. I tried so hard. I think I made it. I had the opposite thing because I saw the first half of the movie and completely fell asleep for the second half of the movie, woke up for the Avengers trailer at the end, and I was like, oh, this is fun. I should really, I guess, see this movie again at some point. And then I did later on, but this is one that really has... other than those inauspicious beginnings, gotten better every single time that I've seen it. Just the way that Joe Johnston builds out the world, and particularly watching it again this time, I was so struck by just the vehicles and everything, and the weapons, and the way that it almost feels in a similar way to how we were talking about Thor builds out Asgard as its fantasy world. This almost builds out a fantasy world of World War II in the MCU in a really exciting way, and it's super fun. So that all said, let's jump in and talk about some of the parts a little bit. Amelia, you mentioned Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter. What is it about this character that draws you in so much? What makes her your favorite character in the MCU?
I mean, the MCU doesn't exist without Peggy Carter. Literally.
Mm-hmm.
She's the entire backbone of the whole MCU. She founded S.H.I.E.L.D. With Howard and the Colonel. However, the Colonel went off to work with Nazis and Howard went off to do Stark Industries. She literally founded S.H.I.E.L.D. There is no Captain America without her. Her and Jarvis's partnership, there is no Tony Stark without her. Like, she is the reason for the MCU that we have today, but she never gets acknowledged for that.
True.
It's fine. I'm fine. So, getting to meet her in this film, it was so refreshing, especially at the time, because we were still in, peak strong female characters, which, we were excited about at the time because we didn't have anything else. But then enter Peggy Carter with, her femininity and her badassery and being, a fully fledged character, which obviously we see more once Agent Carter, the series, happens. But we still see enough of it in this film for the excitement for Agent Carter, the series, to be there. Like, our first main meeting with her is some guy being a jerk and her turning around and punching him in the face and continuing to command this squad. Like, she's amazing. Like, she saw what nobody else saw, and she didn't see it at first because of love. She saw it for the same reason that Erskine saw it. Like, it's not about being the perfect soldier, it's about being the good man. And her attention to all of the things that matter most, both then and throughout her tenure, are how we were able to have the MCU as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with so much of that. Like, you see Cap through her eyes first, and I love that she doesn't recognize it right out of the gate. It takes her a minute to really see him the same way everybody, but she's the real canary there, like being like, there's something about this guy, and just her eyes they're so strong. Haley Atwell is such a great performer in this movie, and she brings as much strength as Steve Rogers does in this movie. And their last moment talking to each other over the radio is so heartbreaking because they are equals. They are equals in this fight. They are equals to each other. And when the mic cuts out right when he's saying he doesn't want to step on her foot or whatever the actual cutout line, it's perfect. It's so good.
Yeah, I agree. She is fantastic, and I love her performance in this movie. It's interesting to hear you bring up the thing about strong female characters at the time. We touched on this a little bit with the Iron Man 2 podcast when we were chatting about this, but it feels in that movie very much like they're putting a hat on it a little bit. Like, they're like, look, Black Widow's kicking butt. Isn't this cool? Don't you love this? And this is the first movie where it really does actually feel very equal between them. Pretty famously, Haley Atwell called out the Ginger Rogers line and said that her character can do everything Captain America does, but backwards and in heels. And I think that's really true. I love that shot of when the car is driving away after Erskine has died and the car blows up, and normally in that scene you watch her fall to the ground or something like that, and then Captain America would run up. Instead, she shakes it off, squares herself up, and shoots the guy from about 50 feet away, and it's awesome. It's great.
So good.
Such a good scene. So she's
That's
great.
So great.
Oh,
one more thing about her. I love also the way so many movies, including superhero movies, overplay the romance. It's like you see the romantic pairing early on. You're like, oh, they're definitely going to get together, and they suddenly love each other out of nowhere. What I love about this movie is their relationship is just starting when the movie ends, and it feels much more real. And I think that plays all the way through Avengers Endgame when you realize what he wants in the end is just to have a chance to have this romance that he didn't get to have, that they just had the beginnings of at the end of this movie. And I think that's so smart. It's one of the only movies that really does it right.
I mean, that was my one ask with Avengers Endgame, honestly, and I think a lot of fans too, which is like, if we don't see Captain America and Peggy get their dance, by the end of this, what are you even doing with this movie? And then, of course, we
Yeah.
kind of do. But
Why'd you introduce time travel if you weren't going to give us this?
Come on, I want things. Let's talk about Chris Evans, because this is something other than the falling asleep that held me back initially with Captain America, was having this picture of Chris Evans as the jokey, fratty, funny dude coming in here. Knew him as Johnny Storm, Human Torch. So he was not somebody that I was like, this guy isn't Captain America. What are you doing? But looking into it, apparently Marvel was all in on him. They asked him 3 times, and he kept turning it down because he felt like, this is not what I want to do with my life. I don't know if I should do this. I don't know if I'm ready for this. This is going to kick me to the next level. And ultimately, Robert Downey Jr. apparently convinced him to actually take the part and said it would be a good idea. But what do you think? What do you think about Chris Evans as Steve Rogers in this movie? Amelia?
First of all, best Chris.
Yes, 100%.
I was excited about it. Admittedly, however, so like, and this is always something that you're not allowed to admit when you do like comic media, especially when you're a girl. But growing up, I basically only read Fantastic Four in the Marvelverse, and everything else that I had was DC. So I never read Captain America, which is hilarious now because Captain America is like such a huge part of my identity now. My dog's name is literally Steve Rogers.
Oh, wow.
But
Hilarious.
back when this film came out, like I had no background. So like I didn't have any real preciousness over the character. So I think that helped. Whereas like, I was just like, yeah, okay, he looks the part. So I'm sure he'll be able to figure it out. It's fine. Like Marvel's casting department had done well enough, but like there was no real concern in that. But flash forward to 2 years ago, and I do want to say that Chris Evans' decision for Knives Out to be his next major blockbuster role was so smart, both on his and Ryan Johnson's part, because you believe him now, like, and it's a testament to his performance that like, no, that's Captain America, that's the good guy. And so like when he's doing his little speech, you're just like, yeah, I believe you. You're totally innocent, even though you're nothing but a fucking knob. Like, oh my God, yes, of course. And then he does the flip and you're just like,
well, he's really, to your point, he's over the intervening years, he's really taken it to heart, like I think the best superhero actors do, and tried to be that person publicly as much as possible as well. And in his case, maybe this is me being a sucker, but I don't think it's totally a PR strategy. I think he really understands how much Captain America means to people, to kids, to people growing up, to MCU fans, and wants to earnestly be that. And then also he wants to be an actor and do Knives Out and, stretch himself a little bit, and that's good. But he's great. And what do you think, Justin?
Just great. I mean, to your point, he does walk the walk. Like, didn't he launch for the election, like a real voter driving website? Like, he does feel like he has embraced fully this idea of I'm Captain America on screen, and I'm a lot of Captain America off screen. So I probably should back that up, and that's commendable. But he's so good in this. The whole this movie's a love letter to him. They're like, hey, unlike the Hulk, we're just going to use your regular body for the superhero, and we're going to shrink you for the dweeby guy. Like, this movie's like, you're perfect, sir. Like, don't change. We're going to back this movie into how amazing you are. So I love that. And this shrink thing is still a little weird, but it works. After a little bit, I bought it. You buy it after a little while.
It's wild. I think you're absolutely right. That first shot of tiny Steve throws you a little bit, but particularly given that these effects at this point are 10 years old, they really hold up in a very surprising way. I mean, a little background there. The guy who played Small Cap, just the body double, was a guy named Leander Dini, who actually shows up later in the movie as the bartender. I believe the one who's asked, like, how do you guys put all these down to the Howling Commandos?
Yes.
So they did actually throw him in the movie. But they did each shot 4 times, which is pretty typical with effect shots, but it's still wild that they filmed each scene 4 times. They shot once with Evans, just regular full body Evans, once with Evans on a green screen, once without Evans, and then once with the body double for any scenes where they were using him. how movies come together boggles my mind sometimes.
It's a lot of painstaking work like that because
Yeah.
that's giving them options in case they can't pull off the final look, and also just creating so much work for everybody. Imagine doing the one with no one where they're just all acting around nothing. Being like, you're gonna get in this machine, ghost. Very hard.
Yeah. Another two quick notes actually on that. One, you mentioned the machine. I think people probably know this, but that amazing shot afterwards of Peggy Carter just like very lightly touching Cap's chest. That was just her. Like she did that because she was like, "Oh, his chest is very. I just want to touch it,"
Yeah,
and
so
improvised it.
shiny.
And then they ended up putting that in the movie, and it's one of the most famous shots, which is great. The other one, there's this behind-the-scenes feature on making the Red Skull, which is actually pretty interesting. Just they talk about how they used very different prosthetics. But the thing that I should have known, but I didn't know for whatever reason, is they gave him like this black nose because obviously Hugo Weaving has a nose. They needed to
Yes.
CGI it out somehow. So instead of giving him like a green nose or leaving it out, like I think they did for Ralph Fiennes for Voldemort, just having a regular human nose there, they made it a black nose, so he sort of looks like an adorable little doggy for most of the shots. It's very interesting.
You say that about Hugo anyway.
I mean,
He's
every
your little
time I watch
puppy.
The Matrix, I'm like, oh, who's this cute little dog? Oh, that's Agent Smith. I remember.
Take that puppy seriously.
Let's talk about Hugo Weaving, though, as Red Skull, as this villain, because unlike Loki, who we talked about last week on Thor, who is a very sympathetic villain, Red Skull definitively is not. Like, he's the worst of the worst. How do you feel about Hugo Weaving in this part? How do you feel about Red Skull as the villain in this movie?
I thought he was great. It's interesting the way the arc of the movie is. You sort of know he's gonna lose at the midpoint as opposed to later. Just there's so much momentum behind Cap, and there's that point when he and Bucky are confronting Cap and Zola with the factory blowing up beneath them. And he's like, look, he's running. And we had the line earlier, like, once you start running, you're never going to stop running. You're like, oh, it's over. Cap just won right there. And you see him fall apart. And it's a testament to Hugo's performance that he's still menacing, even though the movie is like, sorry, dude, you're done. Basically, from that point on.
Yeah. Amelia, what about you?
I mean, Red Skull is, as you said, he's such a transparent villain. Like we know exactly what he's going to do. We know exactly what his play is going to be because we know what all of his motives are. So it's a huge testament to Hugo Weaving's performance that he manages to make this very obvious character, very interesting. Like the way he plays the villainy is just like it's kind of delicious in a way where you're just like, yes, fucking pile it on, Hugo. You're doing amazing, sweetie. Like, he brings like obviously he's a Nazi. Like, how do you make a Nazi more terrible? And then he's like, I'm better than Hitler. Bye. Like,
yeah.
All right. Okay.
Well, what do you guys think about that? Because that's been, I think, there's been so much back and forth over the years, not just about this movie, but about the comics and everything about Hydra versus Nazis and the choice to make Hydra worse than Nazis. Do you have any opinions on that whatsoever?
Well, I mean, I don't know. They don't really say like Hydra's worse than Nazis. It's Hydra's more aggressive or more ambitious or just like organized. Even I don't know. Like it's just like weird. The Nazis don't expect us to be against them. Also, I didn't take it as like, oh yeah, they're worse.
Amelia, you have any thoughts on this one?
I have the same opinion as Daisy in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when they're like, we're not Nazis. You're big fat Nazis.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah, there is, I'll mention, there is a good deleted scene. Most of them are just kind of whatever, but there's one called The Battle of Azano, which is really interesting, and I understand why they cut it out. But right after the montage sequence of Cap doing the Star Spangled Man with a plan, it cuts to Germany, where Bucky and the Howling Commandos are fighting the Germans, and then suddenly you see these blue pulses out of nowhere that are taking out the Germans, taking out the Nazis, and the Howling Commandos are like, "What's going on here? This is great. Is somebody helping us?" And then a huge Hydra tank comes over the ridge and blasts at them, and that's how they end up trapped halfway through the movie. So it makes sense why they cut it out, to make it more of a surprise that Bucky is going to show up there, a better introduction for the Howling Commandos. But on this whole turn from Nazi to Hydras there, it does actually add some information in terms of like, Schmidt has definitively broken with Hitler at this point, and is straight up killing the German army. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
You gotta give it up to Hydra though. Like their organization is going so well that they start making hood ornaments, pins, ascots. Like that's when you know your terrorist organization.
You got a brand. Really what is the gift shop like? That's what I want to know. Exactly. At the Hydra base.
And that's a catalog order. Like it's not like they're going to give that out. You're going to have to special order the.
Oh, it's like a sharper image type thing.
But specifically, it's an inter-organization. It's like Sky Mall.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I see what you're saying. What about, while we're going through the cast here and just kind of running through them, what about Sebastian Stan as Bucky? That was something, and I watched this with my wife, and she was kind of struck the same way, particularly now that we're past Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where it's just like, man, he's got real far from where he started out in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, he was, from the jump, he was just like, oh, this is just a guy. And then it's like, right, it is him. He looks a little different, and then he really progresses over the course of the movie. And it's a switch from having the big brother energy from the front to being very much like Bucky the Kid energy from the comics.
Yeah. Stan's performance in this, and as Bucky as a whole throughout the character's tenure, I feel... is really impressive because like in our first meeting with him, you know, he's Howard Stark, but he's not Howard Stark. Like he's Howard Stark with a heart a little bit more. And like he does protect, you know, his little baby Steve. And, you know, he does want to make sure that Steve is having a nice time as well, despite the fact that Steve does not want to be having a nice time. I want to go fight a war. But, you know, he understands the assignment every single time. And I think that's a huge testament to Stan as this character has shifted and evolved, because we see a change even in this first film from the very beginning, as you said, to later on, where like he's after Peggy comes into the bar and like completely ignores him, and he just looks at Steve and he's like, I'm you. This is my worst nightmare. She didn't even see me. What?
So good. And then Chris Evans tells him his line back to him from earlier, like, Great scripts.
Yeah, it's good. I will mention one qualm here. I think there's some very dorky things that happen, and they're probably purposely dorky, and that's fine. But like the whole fondue thing that keeps popping up is very silly. And some of the reason I brought it up now is some of the repeated lines where I'm like, all right, I get it. You don't have to say this line 3 times over the course of the movie. It's all right. It's fine. It was fun the first time. But I don't know.
But Alex, you're living in an America that went through the 70s fondue craze. And this was back in the 40s where the fondue was only a European thing, that little Steve Rogers, Brooklyn army-obsessed kid, never encountered hot cheese. So he doesn't know what it exactly
All his
it
cheese
is.
was ice cold. That's the way they served it back in
the
Brooklyn.
American way. Yes. Very cold cheese.
This poor soft boy not knowing what fondue is just the cutest thing in the world. It works for me. Like,
yeah,
you do fondue, and like Howard's like, it's cheese, man. Like,
yeah.
oh.
I'll just ask another question that's been heavily debated over the years. Did Steve Rogers have sex at any point?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, and I disagree with Haley Atwell on this. Like, Haley has like been a record. She's like, yeah, they absolutely banged. Like, well before.
When?
Exactly.
When?
Exactly. Margaret Peggy Carter and Stephen Grant Rogers did not have sex before that man died. Like, everything about both of
the
their
first time they
personalities.
touched each other, other than the brief chest touch, was the kiss in the car right before he gets on the plane and then he dies.
Yeah.
That's
like
the first
100%.
time.
There's no way
But-
that's sex, but
Oh,
You
what were
butt.
you going to say?
You butt.
Maybe
You
you're going to
butt
say
first.
this. I was going to say there's that during the montage sequence, there's somebody who comes up and wants him to sign an autograph. There's actually an actress, Laura Haddock, who later plays Meredith Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy. So very non-canonically, James Gunn is like, oh yeah, it's the same character, even though that doesn't work, I think, at all. But there was a moment where like they look at each other, and that was the first time watching this movie last night where I was like, wait a second, maybe sometime on the USO tour Maybe?
Wow.
No, you don't
Why are
think
you
so?
trying to put
Yeah.
Cap in the bed?
That's
He's
not
fine.
how,
He's
that's not how he works.
exactly. He doesn't roll that way. He's waiting for the right dance partner, Alex.
All right. Sorry.
The butt I was gonna throw out is we haven't talked about Tommy Lee Jones yet, who in that Jeep sequence is like, "I'm not gonna kiss you," and that's one of a number of lines where he is perfect in this role, like truly so good, being this fugitive-esque guy who's just telling it like it is. Like I thought he was so good in this throughout.
I consistently forget he's in this movie. I've seen this movie
100%.
so many times, and every time when he shows up, I'm like, oh, right. Oh, Tommy Lee Jones is in this. But yeah, he's fantastic.
The way he's just bringing like peak Tommy Lee Jones energy to the role, but it works so well in everything that like I can't imagine anybody else as Colonel Phillips. And it's so frustrating when we see him first sit down with Zola because we know what's going to, well, actually at that point we don't know what's going to happen later on, but like the knowing that his decision to work with this Nazi is what literally destroys the Avengers decades later is, first of all, really impressive storytelling on their part, but like it's he's like your cranky dad who doesn't want to love the dog. The dog is Steve Rogers, and then he loves the dog, and he's very annoyed that he loves the dog, but it's his favorite dog. Like the way he brings that and just the knowledge that your favorite dad is the one who broke everything is just like so heart-wrenching and great.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's hard to rank this versus his performance as Two-Face, but I guess we can probably put this slightly above it.
Yeah, it's close. It's close, though. Just to call out a couple of specific moments that I love every time I watch this movie. I mean, I feel like maybe the grenade scene is, if not the most iconic scene in the MCU, it's definitely the most iconic Captain America scene possibly in the history of the character. Like, just the simple way they encapsulate everything that Captain America stands for when he jumps on top of that grenade is just perfect. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's great. I got to say that as a test, though, could probably go away. Just if anyone's trying to test their friends.
You
with
didn't
that.
get that?
Don't.
No, I get it, but I'm also
Every
like,
one of my college courses did that throughout my
first day, professor
day.
Like, who's the hero here?
Yeah. Hey, everybody, welcome to food science. Click.
Every food science class needs a hero.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real hero is someone that takes a grenade and throws it away from everyone, perhaps rather than just fully sacrificing themselves.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw a wrench into the grenade test. But maybe the wrench test is a better test.
Some huge Tony Stark energy. Like sometimes you can't cut the wire, but yeah. You should have definitely just thrown that grenade.
Yes. I love that scene, though. Also, the Howling Commandos montage in the middle of the movie is so good and so wild how many different set pieces that they do in the middle there. This is another one that every time I watch it, I'm like, why have we not gotten a Howling Commandos series? Like, straight up, that right there, that is a TV series of them fighting the Red Skull, seeing all of these things and more happen. It would just be awesome. I don't think it'll ever happen at this point, but it's so much fun.
No, we get them in the Iron Ceiling in Agent Carter, which, P.S. is the greatest episode of television that's ever been made. Very important distinction.
Wow.
I do not say that lightly. But that scene, that montage, makes you fall in love with every single one of these men with very, very little screen time, very little dialogue. You're just like, yes, I would die for all of these people. And like, I'm from Fresno, Ace is one of the best lines. Like, where are you from? I'm from Fresno, Ace.
Yeah, the Ace. Yeah. They all have such attitude, and they hit the stereotypical like army guy, World War II army movie things of like, oh, they're all got a little bit of attitude. It's perfect. It reminded me a lot of the montage from Tombstone where Wyatt and the rest of Doc Holliday just go and like wreck shit. Like it was just another perfect execution like that.
Yeah.
Any other moments that struck either of you in the movie or you want to talk about? Amelia, anything? What's your favorite scene in the movie? Oh no!
All of them? She's
broken. Stressful
Amelia
question.
just. If you're listening on the podcast, Amelia just exploded.
I guess I gotta say the end, which is devastating. Just the way Haley Atwell delivers that last Steve ruined my life. Like, goodbye, I'm done for eternity. And she'll do it again with one-liners many times later on. Like, you came back, go away, Haley Atwell. How dare you? Stop this. Stop. You're terrible. But probably that last scene, just the way that, you know, he is falling on the grenade again, and this time there was nowhere to throw the grenade to, and the desperation of everybody. Like, Howard Stark and Tony Stark are very different people, but this scene at the end just perfectly demonstrates that they do share the same DNA. Like, the MCU went a unique route where they made Howard a little bit of a better person than Tony, like, overall throughout, like, life. He got the end moment. But the determination that we see on him, and like the realization that this man is going to look for Steve Rogers for the rest of his existence, despite being labeled as one of the most selfish people on the planet, is hugely interesting. Like, seeing this woman who is hugely independent and trusts very few people because she had to claw to where she gets, just completely broken down and shattered. Like, those last moments are just extremely powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and to that point, it's crazy how much that search changes him, to the point that in 1974 he looks like an entirely different person.
Whole different man.
Unbelievable. Hey, the world's crazy. The world's hard on people.
Justin, what about you? Fave scene in the movie, or other one you wanted to call out?
I mean, that's probably my favorite scene as well, just because it brings together so many things. I mean, I talked about it earlier, but I'll call out a couple things. One, on behalf of Pete, I got to shout out the Tooch, as Stanley Tucci as Erskine. Great performance here. His intimate moments with Steve Rogers are so good when they're sharing the schnapps, and then he drinks both of them, and then later he's like, I didn't save you a lot, so sorry. Like, he's just great, funny, and I like how he's just creeping around the World's Fair looking for guinea pigs at the beginning of the movie. Classic scientist move.
Just on that same note, that exact scene where they're sharing the schnapps is such an important moment, not just within the MCU, but to Americans as a whole, because we don't teach history very well and people don't remember it very well. But his line, the first people that Hitler invaded were his own. Like, the first people who fell to the Nazi army was Germany, and that we wouldn't realize later in our lives would become very important.
Yeah, no, I agree. That is such a good, felt almost tossed away line, but it is hugely important. It's a great call out.
Thanks to Tucci.
Thanks to Tooch. What else was I going to say? The cyanide tooth, very easy to pull out. How do you do that? How do you not do that when you're eating a steak of some sort?
I have no idea. I worry about that all the time, that I would accidentally knock that out. Also, just quick
because
little
you have
thing,
one. You have one, right? Alex?
All of my teeth are cyanide teeth. I've replaced all of them.
You've been in so many terrorist organizations.
You got to diversify. You never know which one you're going to like the best. I love the kid getting thrown in the water, and he's like, "It's all right, I can swim." That's one of my favorite.
He says, "Go get him!" Like, the tough nosed Brooklyn energy from all those scenes is so
much
good. Fun. And I did want to throw out, like, at what point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe did they transition from the Tesseract being like a cosmic cube to being like, actually, it's going to be an Infinity Stone? Because
I feel like after
weird.
this point,
definitely. So it's such a funny thing that they did that, worked so hard to establish this, and then we're like, actually, no, there's a tiny rock inside that little box.
Well, there's, I mean, not that we necessarily, this is controversial and probably shouldn't even be mentioning his name, but Joss Whedon did do a rewrite here to connect things to the Avengers. So at this point, they were already in production on it. So certainly at some point, they were aware that it was going to get broken open and something else was going to happen there. But to your point, it just works differently. And this is talking about the end of the movie. It was always very weird and surprising to me that Red Skull gets zooped away the same way that Thor does with the Bifrost. It's exactly the same effect. And everybody that I talked to afterwards was like, "Oh, he's dead. He died in that, right?" And I was like, "No, he got transported somewhere else." And then later on, of course, that's exactly what happened. But to your point, Justin, I think like we've been talking about a lot on these podcasts, there's a fair amount of improvisation that went on in the MCU, and I think
Yeah.
for the better for it.
And
Yeah.
the fact that they made sense of it all is truly amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like it's not the first Infinity Stone that we see them retcon either. Like when we first meet Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet in the cutscene, everybody started freaking out because the one that Thanos had on his hand was the opposite hand of the one that existed in the throne room. So everybody was like, were there two Infinity Gauntlets? And they fix it with a millisecond scene in Ragnarok with Hela just showing up fake.
Yeah.
Done.
Amazing. All right, there's
They're
probably
good
a
at
lot
it.
more things we could talk about with this movie, but why don't we move on to our vision board where we talk about things that are coming forward? A couple of things to mention. One, there's an animated series, What If? It premieres in August. We don't
Yes.
know the exact date yet, but there are 10 episodes. The second season is already in development, and there's at least one episode apropos of this movie, which is What If Peggy Carter Took the Super Soldier Serum? That sounds great. I'm super into that
Can't
idea.
wait.
Yeah.
Amelia, do you have any interest in watching that episode of television?
Yeah, no, none.
Not
The
my
Captain,
thing.
the Captain Britain comic arc is obviously very brief, but still very fun. So I'm excited to see how they adapt it into What If.
Yeah, I'm also very excited just to see all of the actors returning to their voice roles. Steve Rogers seems to be in it, but like skinny Steve Rogers, maybe in an Iron Man style suit or something like that. But that show should be super wild and fun. Another one we talked about, actually, both of these things a little bit on the Falcon and the Winter Soldier portion of our podcast. But Captain America 4 is coming. Malcolm Spellman, who did Falcon and the Winter Soldier, is working on writing that right now. And also, potentially, Falcon and the Winter Soldier Season 2. But I think the bigger question about both of these, as there were rumors that them were denied, but we know Marvel tends to lie. Do you think do you think Chris Evans is going to come back as Steve Rogers for any of these projects or any others?
I think the only value to bringing Steve Rogers back is in a series about him and Peggy living through history. I think there is no narrative benefit to putting him back in the present timeline outside of like he died and we officially know that he died now. Like the Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes story has grown past Steve. We have said our farewells. We have acknowledged that he is no longer a part of this universe. And I think it's really important to Sam's story that they let Sam's story be Sam's story without Steve's involvement at all.
I think that's 100% right. I could see a flashback, a newly shot flashback that they might need at one point. I think that's cool. But I agree. Like, we're past it. Would love a two-hander series with Chris Evans and Haley Atwell of them just living
awesome.
through the 50s,
Well,
60s.
I'll throw out something else. I mean, this is completely not even rumory, but completely fake. Where a bunch of fans made posters, but there was a rumor going around that there was going to be a series called Captain America: The Last Mission that was going to follow him as he returned all the Infinity Stones after Avengers Endgame, which sounds, I will say, super fun. I'd watch it. The one thing that I kind of missed from that section because they didn't show it in Avengers Endgame is what we don't really get in this movie that we were just talking about is a rematch between Captain America and the Red Skull, like really getting to see them finish that fight in a certain way. So I'd love to see that at some point. If we don't, I think I will survive personally.
Yeah, that's a lot of homework. I don't need to see Chris Evans do homework.
Absolutely.
I'll watch Chris Evans do anything, but I'm not chomping at the bit for it.
Yeah. Before we wrap up here, Amelia, anything you would want to plug? Any place people should check you out online?
Yeah, I mean, obviously check out What to Watch. I have a great team of very smart writers who put out very, very good content. And then you can check out my newsletter at picketywitch or newsletter.picketywitch.com.
Awesome. Amelia, thank you so much for coming on. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed that Peggy shows up in the MCU again for you, if not for everybody else. And for all of you out there, if you'd like to support us, patreon.com/Comic Book Club. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Crowdcast and YouTube. Come hang out. We would love to chat with you about Captain America or any aspect of the MCU. iTunes, Android, Spotify, Stitcher, or the app of your choice to subscribe and listen to the show at Marvel Vision Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. ComicBookClubLive.com for this podcast and more. Until next time, stay marvelous.